What's going on, heroes? We're back with the genius that is Dr. Dave. And today we're going to go through a movement screen, what it is, why you would incorporate it into your daily structure or when you're assessing clients. Dave, what is a movement screen?
Essentially, it's a means of getting an understanding about how someone naturally moves, whether that's for a particular sporting activity or whether that's a functional task at home. It gives us a good understanding as an exercise professional and the person of a natural way that they might move in a circumstance. And we're considering that to be the path of least resistance for a movement pattern. It gives us an opportunity to then assess any asymmetries left compared to right, or if something's not moving so well, and that might give us an opportunity to identify if certain joints or certain areas are being overloaded more than another.
So for the fitness professionals out there, why would they look at incorporating a movement screen with their clients?
Yeah, I mean, I would use a movement screen for all of the clients that I'd see as a physiotherapist, but also from a fitness perspective. We want to get a good understanding of where someone naturally moves from. Are there going to be any limitations to their movement patterns? For instance, if they did something like triple flexion, which is essentially a squat pattern, are they struggling with overhead movements? Have they got a lack of dorsiflexion at the ankle? Things that might impact their ability to perform a particular movement in the gym. And if they've got an asymmetry left to right, which means they might be biasing one side.
And would you say that would be the same process for if you were an athlete or if you're just general population looking to improve?
There might be some subtle tweaks. What we might consider for an athlete is then developing our movement screen towards something that's very sport specific. So whether that's a rower, whether that's a tennis player, whether that's a rugby player, we can then tailor our movement screens to meet the demands of the activity that they're likely to do.
And how often would you come back to that movement screen on an assessment basis to progression or improvements?
Well, there's no real set timescale, but what I might do is say, right, well, okay, we've spotted something like a lack of hip internal rotation on the left side, for instance. We might then put an intervention in place that's trying to address that, and then we might want to check it straight away afterwards to see if what we've done has had any impact on someone's ability to move. But just in the same way, if we've then got a progression of exercise that might last for a few sessions, a few weeks or months, we can then recheck that movement screen in a period of time afterwards to see if we've got progression.
Alright, so we're going to get through this movement mobility assessment. So we're going to come at this from a movement screen for an athlete. We already know I have a dysfunctional wrist, alright?
I generally start off with hips.
Okay.
For me, that's the centre of where we move, not to take anything away from your feet and how they influence movement, but I tend to look at hips to start with. So we're going to look at things in all three planes of movement. We've got the frontal plane, sagittal plane, transverse plane. So the first thing we're going to look at is rotation. So I'm going to get you to stand with your hands out in front, and then I just want you to turn as far as you can to the left and to the right. And the first thing you'll note, Luke, is I haven't given you any specifics about how to do it. I've just given you a broad verbal instruction of what I want, because I don't want to give you too many ideas. I want you just to move through the path of least resistance. So if you turn as far as you can to the right, when you go to that right,
I feel tight as pulling around to the right.
what was interesting about that is because the hip didn't rotate brilliantly, it meant that you then had to use your thoracic spine to get round the corner. So if that's the case, and that back is not moving so much, well, that's a good interesting finding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Most people will tend to rotate better through their thoracic spine towards their dominant side, and less so to the non-dominant side. So if we want to isolate a bit more about that transverse plane rotation of the hip, we're going to go toes in. Going feet turned out, in theory that's going to free things up a little bit. It's going to bring those adductors into play, and it's the groin that may be preventing rotation. Go again then, so we've got feet turned out, we go left and right. So we're now looking at hip flexion. A bit harder to control. We've got a lot more freedom of movement into hip flexion.
Yeah.
So we want to look at the stability aspect as well as the range. So I tend to get people to use a foam roller, which I'm going to get you to put on your foot. Hand's going to go on top, and this is going to create a rigid lever for us.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at this right hip to start with. So we go this way round. All I want you to do is lift the foot, and we're going to push with the hand. We're keeping the knee, the standing knee, fairly straight. I just want you to tilt as far as you can, and then come back up. Again, not lifting that hip so much on that left-hand side. So that links in with our previous assessment that suggests we've got that limitation of hip internal rotation on the right, whereas the left perhaps it might not be quite so strong, but it's certainly got greater range of movement into those planes. So we're starting to build up a comprehension of how you naturally move through the hips, which is going to influence things above and certainly things down below. And we can start to consider, well, what's going to be the impact on that hip of the foot? So when I do a foot movement screen, we can keep it super basic. We could perhaps ask someone, can they open out into inversion through their feet? Can they open and load their feet onto the outside edges? Can they load back down through the middle instep of their feet? To getting an idea of how well that subtalar joint moves. And then we might want to do something as simple as a 1 foot single balance. Might give them some stability to start with, so put your hand on there, and we can simply just come up, see how that looks. That in itself is a really simple movement screen. We also want to get an idea of range of motion through the ankle.
I'll leave your ass dead on the ground for my funds. Rest of my ticket, they know I'm the one. My shit going global, I'm hot as the sun. Never come down, I sit till I'm done. Sipping on Hennessy, chasing with rum. Fucking your bitch and you know that she gone. Came out the book at the bitch by the tongue. Came for the trap and this is fun. Now we stack up all the rocks in the club. Yeah. Stack to the ceiling, hundreds and fifties, yelling my name when I'm up in the city. My bitch.
So we've had a good look at what's going on mechanically further south. Now, if we want to isolate what's going on in terms of the thoracic spine, we've got to do something to fix the pelvis. So we can either sit on the floor, we could sit on a gym box. Probably wouldn't use a gym ball because that's going to create some movement. We want something that's going to isolate and fix hips. So what we'll do to start with is we'll go into kneeling. Now this is going to allow a little bit of rotation through the hip, but it's going to limit it to start with because we've taken a bit of that femur out of play. And then again we'll go through our hands in front position and we're just going to scoop around left and right. So you can see we've still got a bit of hip play, but not quite so much as we had before. Can you sit back on your haunches a little bit? And now we're really asking that T-spine to move in isolation. Let's just get an idea. Now this isn't about the global range of movement, it's more about where it's coming from. So when Luke rotates to the left, you can see we've got a few hinge points. We've got a little bit of a hinge through here and a bit through here, but we've got a fairly global movement. And now let's go around to the right. A lot more movement through here, through that T-spine, that middle part of the T-spine when we go around to that right-hand side. So if we would be concerned about anything, it would be Luke's ability to rotate to the left. Now, that's going to be different if we take hands above head. So let's perhaps take hands above your, behind your head or neck. And now so we've pulled all of that T-spine into extension already. Now let's rotate left and right. So again, we've filtered that movement pattern further south. And then when we go around the corner, again, we get more further up. So again, it's a similar pattern to what we saw before.
Alright, so what did you find, Dave?
So what we've seen is the lack of hip internal rotation and extension on that right-hand side. And so what we're going to do now is build in some kind of drills that you can use before a workout perhaps, and then something that could progress into into a workout in of itself to try and get some of that physical adaptation that we're looking for.
Perfect.
So there's lots of reasons, firstly, why we might get that physical restriction through the hip. It can be strength deficit that can create physical restriction. We might have some capsular range deficits through the joint space. So we might want to dig into that a little bit further. Saying that, the treatment is going to give us a good understanding of which structures are going to be affected, whether we can change those. So if we think about that hip internal rotation, what's going to limit that? Well, what we've got going on with our glutes is diagonal tissue. All of those muscle fibers are diagonal. It's tensing into the greater trochanter. So what we want to do is load that in a triplane.
And we love talking glutes on this show.
Oh, we love a glute. So
love
what
a glute.
we want is rotation.
Yeah.
So what we want is that diagonal rotational pattern to load. Now, again, if I want my extensors to kick in and I've got a movement pattern that's loading toe heavy, I'm primarily going to be on my quads, the kneecap. What we want therefore is load that's going to go through my heel. So I would tend to use a diagonal pattern of right, so we'd be loading into internal rotation through here. What we could use is our foam roller again. I don't need it, so I'll stand like here, and I'm going to then push and rotate and load through with a little step touch. Rotating in, stepping up. Now what we might see, as we're going to then view the person doing this, is that knee buckling out? We might want to try and say, okay, can we brace that knee a little bit? Can we load it through here? We might say, let's try and do it with a slide if they need a bit more stability, so we use a slide disc to rotate it into that position. What we could do then is build in a bit more speed, so we could be here, and then I'm actually stepping into that movement pattern. I'm stepping in and rotating. So we've got internal rotation through the hip through here. If I wanted to add a bit more adduction, we could then go into a curtsy pattern perhaps. So I've still got internal rotation or relative internal rotation of the hip, but now I've added adduction to load those higher structures. So I can then go into through here. Again, I've got a slide. I can do it super slow and controlled. I've got it with a toe touch, or I can then build into a step pattern where I'm pushing back off it. So I've got two diagonals that are both hip flexion and internal rotation. The curtsy is then adding some adduction. Okay, so how do I then want to foster some hip extension? Now the trouble with hip extension is if I've not got a great deal of it from the hip, chances are I'm just going to be hinging through my lower back, which is a problem for a lot of people. So how can we prevent that from happening? We might want to slow this down a little bit, because a dynamic, explosive movement is just going to move through the path of least resistance. So we might want to prop someone in that position already, and then just work through lowering down and then coming back up, because it could be rec fem that's providing the restriction through here. Could be primary hip flexors themselves, psoas iliacus. So we can just work through that movement pattern, just building in. If I was putting a lot of load on my front foot and not generating enough load through the rear, we might want to block up the front. And that's going to give us that rear step back to ensure that I'm going to be sliding through into those positions. We looked at our initial warm-up pattern. Now we're going to build it into a bit of a routine. So we've got a slide disc, gym bar. We wouldn't necessarily need to be able to use a foam roller. The weight's not at the moment that important. So we're going to put our sliding foot. So if we're working on the right hip, that's going to be our balanced foot. Left foot's going to be on the slide disc. I'm going to take the bar to start with, and we're going to work on a diagonal pattern, and then I'm going to come across my body, trying to keep that back foot as light as possible. Okay? So Luke, if you're just going to slide, and then we'll just rotate on a diagonal. Lovely. So Luke's just going to continue to slide through that diagonal, keeping that back foot as light as possible. We might want to encourage keeping that knee over the sort of laces through the foot, but that's a good movement pattern. Now, if we want to increase that internal rotation at the right hip, what we could look to do is go left hand down, Luke. So if you then turn left hand down, as we do the movement, we're going to be able to force that left hip to drop, and that's going to create more internal rotation. Great, so Luke's actually moved more in the transverse plane there than I'd like, so he's kind of rotated with his upper body. I want it to rotate down, so I'm going to give him the instruction to say left shoulder down. So we're going to go left shoulder down, because what I'm looking for in this position is to try and keep a neutral spine, so the rotation occurs at the hip, and he's not fixed, and then my back is compensating, which is what you initially did, Luke. Okay. So let's try and stay neutral through that spine and keep that left shoulder rotating down. There we go. And that's asked that right hip to do more. And then we can use a different level of driver. So we've gone fairly neutral here. Now what about, Luke, if we then take that left hand down? That's going to put in a little bit more hip flexion. Okay. There we go. So we've got more hip flexion. We can just in the same way, we can take that hip flexion out by taking it up and round. Okay, so let's now work on our curtsy pattern. So that's going to bring the adduction component in. So again, we'll do our initial. We're just going to go round the corner and sit into it. All the while, we're then focusing on the quality of that movement, where it's coming from. So what I'm trying to be is less verbal with my coaching. And if someone's like, right, we're not moving particularly well in that way, just go, right, that's brilliant, well done, we'll come out of that, we'll move in a different way to encourage it. So what Luke's doing here a little bit, he's got quite a lot of knee over toe when we've gone through here, and I want a bit more load to the rear, rather than it being forward set. So what we could do is we could wedge up the front of the foot a little bit. So if I just put that there and you put your toes on it, okay, that's just going to load him through the heel, and then we should be sitting back into that movement pattern a little bit more. There we go. So instead of verbally,
rotated the wrong way.
Instead of, yeah, you're going to go in that direction. You're going to go
Right hand down. Yeah.
Now you're going to go left hand down towards me. Just keep it straight to start with. It's not complicated.
You don't want me rotating?
No, I'm just going to want you to go around the corner, hands level.
Oh, okay.
That's nice. So instead of verbally cueing Luke to not have so much knee forwards, I've gone well done, prop the foot, and that's meant he's shifted his weight to the rear. Let's add in that drop now. So we're going to go left hand down, which is going to keep our spine in neutral, and that's going to create a real adduction pattern of that left hip, that right hip.
Left hand down.
Left hand down. Yeah, you got it. So we're following that diagonal. There you go. So hands to me. Just go hands to me. I'll guide you. You ready?
Oh, has it?
There we go. All right. And we really want to be dropping that left hip in, adducting. Lovely. Feeling that through that right hip?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I bet. Go ahead, just pause there. So what we'll now do is we'll take away the slide and we're going to take it into a step. So the step is a transition of weight to the rear. That's certainly going to unload the front of my foot. It's going to be a little bit more dynamic. So this has got a bit more speed to it. So now we're going to be step and back.
Still to up?
Same, no, we'll leave that. We'll keep that there, give you a bit more stability. So we're just going to step across and we're going to be there. Step and back. Lovely. That's good. Nice reach to the rear. Dropping through that hip. That's lovely. Okay, pause there. So what we've got that diagonal. And now what we can do is work on our initial diagonal. Each time, however, it's the same with your hands. It's a left hand down driver. Yep. Okay, so we're going to go diagonal here and then a diagonal around the corner. Okay. Let's see how this looks. So there's our curtsy pattern, lovely.
Oh no.
Oh, that's tricky. Imagine you're on a cross like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be going there.
There and then there.
And then round the corner.
Got it.
And again, each time I'm looking to see what's going on at that hip, what's going on at that T-spine. That's lovely. Brilliant. Okay, pause there. So what we've got is our two diagonals, which are loading that hip into rotation. And now we want to say, okay, we need a little bit more hip extension. So how could we encourage that without that back going back? So what we'll do is we'll add a third element in. So we've got our diagonal here, and now what we're going to do is just a simple little toe back to the front. Now, the temptation could be that we're just going to lean back on this. So what we want to do is make sure that we're going to be pushing that hip forwards with a bit of rotation. We're going to take the bar and we're just going to come overhead. All right? And then we'll see if we can build that into our triple movement. So I've got hip extension, straight through the diagonal and back up. And then I've got my diagonal across. And then we've got pretty much every movement pattern that can occur at that hip covered. That's lovely. Good. Don't overextend it too much.
So
we've got
just from the hip, or
what we'll do is we're just going to try and lift your belt buckle.
Yeah.
Nice tuck, Don't put any weight on that front foot, and we're just guiding it forwards through here, and then we'll go straight through the diagonal. Let's just work on that movement pattern to start with. So we're going to go overhead touch, straight through into the diagonal. That's nice. Good. And then bring that left foot round into our diagonal. Lovely, and go through it again, straight forwards into that hip there. That's good. Coming back through. Great, this time when you come through with that left foot, I don't want you to put any weight on it, it's just a toe touch. Okay. There you go, you've got all three now. Great, it's just a toe touch there, don't load it. There you go.
This one?
Yeah, it's just a little load here. I want to keep all my load on that right hip.
Okay.
That's it, feel it through the front of that right hip, into my diagonal, there you go. There's our curtsy, and then our last rotation. Brilliant, really nice. A really great way of getting every facet of that right hip to move. And if we saw from our squat or our movement screen that that wasn't moving great, this is the kind of progression we could move on in terms of a workout. How would we develop it? We can add speed, we could add load by increasing the bar weight, or we could really, really slow it down and take some of that stability away where we're doing it in a really slow progression, maybe 3-4 second down, 4 second up, really asking that hip to work. However, working with an athlete, we've got to start building in speed capacity because most sports have got a really distinct dynamic element to them, and if we don't build that progression, that we might see those movement patterns undo when we come back to something explosive.
All right, let's do a workout.
All right, so we've been through our warm-up pattern to get that hip moving a little bit better. We've identified the right isn't moving so great. Now we want to work out the starting to build the dynamic of rotation and then explosive power. So generally how I would sketch this out is an initial drill that we'll call a load, okay? And so we want something where the stability is fairly high. We don't want to be wobbling around too much. We want to be able to move through range. So we want fairly high stability. Okay, we want the load is going to be relatively high, reps are going to be fairly low, and it's going to be our core. If we're working on a hypertrophy phase, this is going to be our sort of failure sets. Following that, we want something that's then going to ask more range, so we want EOR, end of range. We want something that's stability based, perhaps the reps are that little bit higher, might want to go slightly higher with the reps, but we maybe want to then drop some of that stability to make it a bit more challenging. Once we've got those two factors put in, what we've then got to consider is, have we got the ability to create something that's more sport specific? And that needs speed. So we're going to increase speed, make it dynamic, make it sport specific. So the range is going to be quite high, speed is going to be high, and it's going to be perhaps multi-joint components. And if we work on those three phases back to back, we're leaving little recovery in between. We're converting something that's very slow, controlled, high load into something that's dynamic. It's a really nice way to set up a triple, and we could then put multiple. So we've got a hip specific triple. We could then do something that's moving up the chain, maybe towards the T-spine as a triple, or then we can move down and work something that's knee or ankle focused. It's just a nice way to set out something that's quite rounded, but it is quite sport specific.
So I'm going to take Dave's information and the exercises here that I'm going to pick. Bulgarian split squat, but with a slight difference. So we're going to have a low back foot raise, but we're also going to use a front foot slant board, just to really tap into that glute. So that's going to really make this more glute focused. Start to build some explosiveness into this. We're going to use our landmine curtsy to press, and then the final exercise is the fully plyometric, and for this one I'm going to use sled explosive rotation. So with all that in mind, let's get the workout on. Obviously, for a little bit of coherency and consistency, we're going to do this on both sides, okay? So whilst Dave obviously recognised that slight dysfunction I have through the internal rotation of my right hip, we are going to take the workout and apply it to both sides, so at least globally we're a little bit more symmetrical. Let's get it!
See that, want that, bring it back. See that, want that, bring it back. See that, want that, bring it back. with big lean arms, start singing to a pink guitar. People begin listening, they think he's hard. They asking where the hell's he from? Is he from these parts? I'm a cowboy down from outer space, sent to set a precedent. I'm the rhyme minister, the first rap president. From crew to Connecticut, the music I make it resonates with the residents. I'm top show billing with the flow so thrilling. Winning with the big win, I'm stone cold chilling. Ring a ding dong, I'm incoming. Come again, suckers, if you want some honey, go nuts like a...
If you like this kind of style, then drop us a like, drop us a comment. Please subscribe if you are new, and let us know if there's anything that you would like to see us work on in the future.